Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 841 Colossal Dungeon. Colossal Dungeon 7th floor up. Damn, Tekker and Link commented at the same time. After they fought through the waves of guards on the 5th and 6th floor, they suddenly reached the top of the stairs, where they faced an overwhelming scenery. After passing under the door, made of dark, lacquered wood, they stood in a massive hall. The hallways on the lower floors paled in comparison. It was like standing in a cathedral with the high, arching ceilings so far up above them, that they had a blue tinge like the sky outside. The darkness from the stairwell was gone and everything was brightly illuminated by a sourceless light. "Do you think this is the main floor of this castle?" Jonah asked awed. "Were all these stairs and floors before only something akin to the servant quarters?" Monique wondered. "I don't think so. Does it make sense to station that many guards on the way to the cellar?" Allison mentioned as she checked their surroundings. "Maybe they were guarding against what is below? Didn't you say there were undead on the lower floors and the guards didn't dare to follow down to a certain point? There is also the fact that the darkness let off the higher we came and this place is all bright," Ellie pondered. "Then maybe the theme of the dungeon is something along the lines of life and death? Below the castle are the undead and up here are the living having to deal with their undead neighbors," Toho voiced a suspicion. "If you are right, that means we have a problem. Let's say this dungeon begins at the border between life and death, then where is the dungeon boss? Is he down in the crypts or up here with us?" Linri said grimly. She had come across many dungeons during her time abroad and she had heard quite a bit about them when she was still a priestess in the theocracy of chains. One thing he had learned was that the more unique a dungeon was, the bigger it was the trouble it brought when one tried to conquer it. This place was not just crawling with monsters, but it also seemed to follow a theme, maybe even a story it tried to tell. Even though the course was simply breaking through the mobs that stood in their way, without any riddles or traps, this simplicity could be treacherous. "Whatever it is, we should get ready for much harder fights," Archer suddenly announced. "What makes you say so?" Monique asked, but the question answered itself when she saw where Archer was looking. Stepping out from a passage to their right was a colossus clad in a full set of heavy plate armor. Colossal Night Guard Leave - Elite. Despite the restrictions being lifted, the monster's level was so high that their observation skills were unable to gauge its level simply because of the level difference. This meant it had to be at least above Leave 115. "Do you think we can do this?" Monique asked Ellen of all people. The reason for this question was the last floor where they met a colossal guard captain. So far, the colossi held no skills or magic, except for being of colossal size and having stats fitting their stature. There was nothing special about them. They were just like huge humans, but that was already enough to be a big problem. Like people, they could use equipment, even if there were no special effects. The sheer mass of material was a problem. For example, the colossal guard captain wore a chain shirt so thick that their bigger skills could barely scratch him. Not to mention the armor plates he wore in addition to it. In the end, they managed to finish him off thanks to Ellen. They were just simple iron equipment, but of ridiculous size. The slime rancher had the genius idea to use her corrosive slimes to add armor break to it. These slimes were already able to give serious damage to magical metals and items. Facing iron, they ate through it like solvent through styrofoam. Not the whole thing, and I doubt we can make it fall off him as easily as the chain mail. If you distract it long enough, I might be able to sneak some corrosive oozes into its armor and melt a hole to reveal its heart. Ellen pondered. "What are you so worried about, Monique? It's not like it will be a danger, even if it is tough," Shay asserted. "Even when it wore a thick steel armor, it wouldn't be able to stand up to their combined battering. Yet, but we don't know how big this dungeon is and what else will come. What if we suddenly get swarmed by elite knights like that? We should pace ourselves and look for the most efficient strategy," Monique explained to the water mage. "I agree. There is no knowing how much bigger this place is going to become, and we already know that the mobs don't adhere to our notion of fixed floors. It's best to stay vigilant and be prepared." Toho, the tiger Tijat, agreed with her. "If it is about efficiency, then I may have a suggestion," Beeman started. "Alshan, can you also use illusion magic? Something like cloaking or chameleon would probably suffice." "I can, though it won't necessarily last for long." "What do you intend to do?" the wizard answered, curious about what the veteran adventurers were going to suggest. "I think it is time for Tekker to take the stage," he said mysteriously. "Me." Colossal Dungeon 6th floor down. Light illuminated the darkness. It fell on gaunt skeletons wearing crude armor. Their dry bones were covered in their desiccated grey flesh and a deep red light shone in their eyes. The crypt guards kept pouring from the hallways and came tumbling up the stairs. It was similar to the situation above, yet different. The clattering of bones and old armor, the moaning of the damned, and their breathless war cries were drowned by the roar of laser beams and explosions of golden light. The light that illuminated them also eradicated them. Seth and the others had no illusion about the current situation. They were just playing the support units for Finn and Puffles running rampant. With her radiant crown on her head and constantly changing size between a fairy and that of a giant half the size of the colossi, the fairy's shining fists caused explosions wherever she hit. Like the shock wave of an exploding sun, the explosions would swallow and disintegrate big chunks of the undead, leaving their lifeless bodies to fall, or sometimes just their empty equipment hit the ground. The nightmare centipede on the other hand was like a laser scalpel. Flying above the stairs like the bringer of doom, the rays of golden light he breathed from his mouth cut apart several undead in a row, leaving them to fall dead or crippled. Seth and the others took care of the remnants or offered support in case Finn got in a pinch after storming into a whole group inside the hallway. Sometimes Seth would use the scorching light of Antares to get rid of whatever managed to crawl up the stairs or the light arrows of Apollon to support Finn. "How much further until we reach the bottom of the stairs?" he asked Lydia, who was busy shooting divine arrows down the stairs. "We are on the 6th floor down, I think. There should be another 7 floors below this before we reach the bottom where we were last time," the divine archer answered, suppressing the memory of the torture that was climbing that kind of distance up a rope. Since that time, she no longer brought rope along, but rope ladders. "That means we are at the halfway point?" Seth pondered, as he looked at his experience bar. It seemed like he had underestimated the requirement increase a little. Actually, it was a lot. Before it was always something like double of what was needed before. Reaching Level 97 needed almost 5 times as much experience, if he compared the amount of experience they gained per mob they killed. Despite the mobs being stronger and theoretically giving more experience, too. With this new estimate, he could only doubt that they could raise their level to 100 by the time they reached the bottom. They could only hope the bottom was not actually the end. At this pace, we might have to visit a few other dungeons after this. Chapter 842. Ting ting ting. Colossal Dungeon. The Castle. Ting 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 ting. The noise of metal hitting metal sounded quietly in the distance. The party watched as the colossal knight twitched and bent to get something off the back of his armor. "Do you really think this will work?" Monique asked doubtfully. However, her question was answered before Beamont could voice his confidence. With a crash, the colossus knelt. The knight had started to slow down before, but he finally could sustain his own weight anymore. This situation came about because Beamont had experience with the curse of burden. The seasoned adventurer knew that the curse added weight based on the recipient's weight, not a fixed value. It wasn't as powerful simply doubling the weight of something it hit, but even suddenly being 10% heavier than you are used to could be a tremendous disadvantage in a fight. His idea was simple: they had Tekker and the dragonfly hidden by Allison's illusion magic. Then Tekker used it to fly over the colossus and jump onto the back of his armor. The rest was simple: the tank banged his pipe from behind until the other gave in. The reason why Beamont believed this plan would work, was the fact that the colossi were not stronger than their physique suggested. Unlike players and other kinds of monsters whose physical traits far surpassed their outward appearance, they were like supersized normal humans. How many times their own body weight could a human endure when he was already wearing a heavy armor? And then there was also Tekker, sitting on his back, gaining weight at the same time. "This actually went faster than I thought," the adventurer commented. With the colossal night guard suffering Tekker's status ailment, the party had to add quickly before Tekker couldn't keep up. The moment the tank was unable to swing the pipe, the debuffs would start running out. The rearguard aimed their skills and spells at the slits in the massive helmet, while Ellen and the vanguard ran up to it to melt a hole in the armor and attack. Only Asterion and Wolfram stayed with the mages and archers to protect them. The result was quick and brutal. Using Beamont's strategy, they managed to quickly finish off the elite monster without losses or using their trump cards. "I wish it had been this easy all the time," Ellen mumbled as she was retrieving her corrosive slimes which had eaten deep into the knight's body. "It wouldn't have worked. There were too many and they might have been able to throw off Tekker since they didn't wear such constraining armor," Beamont explained to her, as the giant body was quickly reabsorbed by the dungeon. "All right, let's keep going like this," Monique announced as they continued exploring the castle. Colossal Dungeon. 9th floor down. "Just barely managed to cross Level 97. Seth mumbled, staring at his status. He felt a little depressed since he had gotten his hopes up that they might be able to reach level 100 in one go. The blacksmith could help his motivation by taking a little dive when he actually faced the hurdle of these last 5 levels. Suddenly, he felt someone shove his shoulder, interrupting his thoughts. Mina sat beside him. It doesn't matter whether we reach level 100 here. I told you, this is to spend time together. Stop thinking of maximizing the results, she said with a smile, leaning against his shoulder. He leaned back onto her. Right, I forgot for a moment. Mina reminded him of something he had already realized before. Just reaching level 100 would not bring immediate gains, so there was no reason to hurry. It was just that he had a hard time getting out of the mindset of reaching immediate goals. She was right, this was an adventure to distract himself, so it was best to focus on the dungeon. Over the course of their descent, the undead colossi slowly turned from a zombie-like appearance to that of mummies. The last group they defeated was called Forlorn Tomb Guard and looked like desiccated corpses. They were a little weaker strength-wise, in exchange their bodies were hard as metal, making the armor they wore almost redundant, and faster. While the team had little trouble dealing with the monsters so far, they found that the darkness not only became thicker but also caused a status effect after elongated exposure. The status window was called encroachment of miasma. The dark soup they were currently walking through and breathing in was probably this miasma, and it slowly accumulated in their bodies. As the effect grew, it lowered their overall stats while it had the opposite effect on the undead. Evie's army profited from the environmental debuff, while the rest of the party had to be regularly cured of the effects. Thinking of it like the dungeon had a theme, it was almost like it was a struggle between darkness and light. As if the darkness from the crypts below was trying to swallow the castle and its inhabitants. If this wasn't a dungeon, one could think the up and the down were opposing sides. Seems like we reached the bottom, Link announced as he returned on the back of a flying golem. The gourmet hunter had offered to scout ahead while the others set up camp on the 9th floor. Even with night vision and Seth's divine vision, they could hardly see the next few steps down. This was how thick the miasma had become at this point. After Link dove into that thick soup to see how it continued, he reported that they were actually on the landing of the last set of stairs before reaching the bottom. Are you sure? Lydia asked, perplexed. Back then, they had used ropes to get all the way down in this pitch-black darkness. Roping down to the bottom had felt like an eternity, and she could have sworn there would be more floors. She had expected there to be at least 15. She also could not remember passing the floor where the guards had stopped following them. When she explained herself, the others on her team couldn't remember either. However, Link was sure that the next floor was the bottom. On top of that, it was guaranteed that they were already deeper than the floor Team 3 was talking of. Maybe you guys just got a little confused in this darkness? Or you didn't have the time to recognize it with all the fighting, the chef hypothesized. Or has the dungeon changed since then? Mike pondered. That was also a legit possibility. Maybe the dungeon had shifted since Team 3 came here. It was rare for this to happen in regular dungeons, but it was common knowledge that it could happen in many high-level dungeons. The less a dungeon followed a template, the harder it was to predict its shape and behavior. Do you think there is a meaning behind the dungeon's change? Seth asked. He didn't doubt Lydia's words, the dungeon changing seemed more likely to him. Maybe our actions caused it. But why would the undead have fewer floors, when we mostly killed living guards? Lydia asked, confused. Whatever it is, we may never find out, but we are finally about to reach the bottom, James said, rubbing his hands. Yes, the time for our revenge has finally come, Jess said with fire in her eyes. Although Finn and Puffles had taken the lead, this couple had also run rampant, especially on the recent floors. Especially Jess, who now had 2 legendary items in addition to her divine class, was just burning through undead like they were tinder, reminding Seth of good times. Seeing how you two are still eager and full of energy, how about you guys take the first guard shift, Seth suddenly said with a sardonic smile. Wah! Wait, that's not why us. Right, Ceres doesn't need sleep, why should we stay up to guard? What are you saying now? You shouldn't rely on poor Ceres so much. Of course, we will keep up normal guard duties, Lydia scolded them with a similar smile to Seth's. The two had become a little conceited ever since they were chosen by the gods, so it was good to take them down a peg once in a while. Begrudgingly, the couple had to take the first guard shift, while everyone else went to sleep. Chapter 843 Tree Station 8. Tree Station 8 In the newest tree station and the first that was directly in the direction of Ypsilon, Karina was busy cultivating housing trees for future occupants, when a commotion distracted her. She felt the chimera's footsteps running toward her before he appeared in her vision. Lady Karina, people have appeared from the direction of Y City, the left head of the two-headed chimera reported. Merchants? Karina asked unperturbed. Although the mountains had become quite dangerous, there were still more than enough people willing to take the risk to travel for profit. Unlikely, for now, it's a group of men observing us from afar. I don't think they have good intentions. Okay, I will come to take a look, Karina said, stopping to feed energy into the growing building. The tree was still a sapling barely 200 m tall, its crown only 300 m in diameter. It would grow bigger in the future, but it would have to do so with its own power. The way to reach the edge was not long. Here she found that the team of chimeras she came with had taken formation behind the curtain of vines. What is the situation? She asked friendly as she joined the rows of chimeras in silver armor. They just started to move, the chimera captain said, pointing at the ridge. She saw a group of well-dressed people in the distance. At their helm stood a man wearing a white lab coat and rectangular glasses. Since everyone is here, let's see what they are capable of, to dare and challenge the scene, he suddenly shouted, as if he had only waited for Karina to appear at the scene. From behind the group, a flood of bodies poured over the mountain and toward the lone tree standing in the middle of snow and wind. Again with the human wave tactics. The chimeras were anxiously watching as the first line of defense activated. As the flood entered the ring of soul-whisking formations, the mindless people suddenly had tails of smoke and dust floating behind them, like a vampire in the sun. However, to their shock, they were not stopped by the soul-whisking formation. Their tailor-made clothes hang loosely from their bodies that looked skinned, or half disintegrated, but were quickly healing as the horde stormed toward the tree. The best weapon they had against the immortals had failed. How could that be? The chimeras got ready for battle, but Karina stopped them with a swipe of her hand. Get back, further toward the trunk, she commanded them, her voice had lost her friendly warmth. Something had awakened in her when the guardian tree was born. A second nature that had been dormant. It was a cold and cruel feeling, but she had realized that it was fundamentally part of her. It was not a dehumanizing violence that asked for blood, but a righteous vengeance born from her love for others. A glorious lust for murder towards anyone who tried to harm what was hers. Between the formations and the tree, there were no other protective measures set up, yet. The enemy was free to cross the space. She felt pity for these creatures. Humans that were mutilated and now used as pawns, but it changed nothing. Before they could even reach the curtain of vines, the frontmost line of attackers suddenly jerked to a halt, before being pulled under the snow. Only the spraying snow indicated what happened to them, as they were rapidly pulled towards the tree and then up into the crown. This was the hanging tree. Cold and cruel, she could feel the branches and roots pierced through the bodies of its victims, sucking them dry of blood and energy. Not just feel it, it was at her orders. It didn't matter that they were immortal, they would just become a constant source of sustenance, as networks of roots penetrated their bodies, turning them into parts of the tree. It didn't matter how many enemies there were, it was only a growing number of strangled bodies decorating the branches of the hanging tree. As the branches were laden with lineafied bodies, the older ones slowly turned into lumps and bumps on the bark, as the tree grew at a visible rate. The tree became their grave and the struggling beings were integrated and buried in it. Forced into eternal slumber. It was Karina's act of mercy, hoping to end their mindless suffering. The people standing on the ridge, executives of the scene, could only watch in stupor, as the tree continued to gobble up their troops, they had reared and grown over the weeks and months. Stop this, call them back, Glasses commanded. Are you sure? How would I not be sure? As it is, we are just feeding their tree. Who would have expected the tree to be such a big problem? If we want to use the circs, we have to get rid of the tree first. But this was a bigger task than one might think. As big as it already seemed, facing a massive flesh-eating tree. The last report from Mount Agra said that the tree of Agra had even managed to strangle the avatar of a god, that the Dwathata summoned, to a hold. Either they had to get rid of the tree, or catch them when they left its protection. Seeing that nobody from the other side attempted to come out of the protection, they decided to return. Let's return for today. Glasses finally said, after what was left of the circs had returned. They slowly returned to their temporary camp not far away, from where they could observe the tree and the people of Mina's march. In his tent, Glasses brought out a communication device. It was a device created by mixing modern and arcane knowledge and allowed video communication. Of course, they had communication orbs, but those were not cheap. Their devices based on smartphones were much easier to produce. Glasses? Report. The face of a serious man with a seriously bushy mustache appeared on the screen. Glasses explained to his superiors what had happened to the Cirques they sent in. The tree was like a fortress and it would take a lot of men, actual adventurers not their throwaways, to overcome just one of them. To make it worse, the tree was also healing and growing over the course of a fight. I advise against trying to conquer them with infantry. Large-scale bombardment through magic or artillery and siege are better options, Glasses concluded his report. I will further your report. Stay where you are and keep an eye on them. Try to cut off their supplies and harass them once they move on. We will send you some reinforcements, the order came through the communication device. Sir, are you sure we should let them proceed? Glasses didn't know if it was a good idea to let them continue to plant trees, as they got closer and closer to Y City. It was not hard to imagine how difficult it would be to get rid of them. Trust our leader. We have to end them for good in one fell swoop. If that means inviting them into our house, then that is what is necessary. Understood, it came back through the speaker. Understood. Chapter 844 The Crypts. Colossal Dungeon, the Castle. The path was not as free for Monique's and Jonah's team, as they found colossal knights guarding and patrolling at regular distances and intervals all over the place. They managed to act relatively stealthy thanks to one of Linri's buffs. Her buff Fortune of the Battlefield increased the chance to trigger status effects against opponents. The pipe, Tekker's weapon, had a 15% chance to cause silence on hit. With the Priestess's buff, this became almost 50%. The buff also improved all other effects of the pipe. Despite the Colossi having a high immunity to most status effects, with all their efforts added together they were able to take down the singular guards without alerting anyone else. They traveled around the brightly illuminated opulently decorated hallways and checked the doors they came by. Noble Colossus leave ... The rooms were often empty, but sometimes there would be a Colossus in luxurious garments. These guys were actually dangerous, as they were the first instance of Colossi being able to use mana to strengthen their attack, which was the basis of a crude skill. It wasn't magic, but it made them more dangerous unless they managed to surprise them. After 6 or 7 rooms like this, they came to a corner and saw another staircase. It was a circular one this time and it led far up into a slender tower. There is a big wooden door up there, but the stealth wore off before I could enter. Should we go up and have a look together, or continue down here? Archer asked when he returned. They had used illusion magic on Archer and the Archer went ahead to scout to see where the staircase led. It could be an optional aerial with an optional boss, Doho suggested. If it's optional, can we skip it? Link asked curious. That wouldn't be a good idea, just because it's optional, it doesn't mean it has no purpose. Killing it early on could give us an advantage in clearing the dungeon, the Tigerman explained. However, it would be a good idea not to do it immediately. If we go up now, the boss could call the rest of the guard to help him, as the nobles tried. We were just lucky that we got rid of the guards before entering the rooms, Linri interjected. Monique and Jonah exchanged a look, communicating silently. Then let's clean up all the guards and nobles on this floor, while looking for the final boss, before taking on the optional boss. Once we have a better understanding of this place, we will make the decision. Colossal Dungeon, the Crypts. This is some seriously insane interior design, Seth complimented the dungeons. In the thick darkness caused by the fog-like miasma, they could only see one of the walls, but they found it was lined with massive columns, reminiscent of the underground city of the dwarfs Seth lived in as Tort's disciple during his time in Aura. Flying into the darkness above they recognized high vaulted ceilings supported by these massive pillars. Yet, the insanity the blacksmith described was not the crude massive masonry, but the massive, blown-out portcullises they came across every few hundred meters. Metal bands the width of roads and 1 meter thick were riveted into the shape of a grid and used to block the path as portcullis, were ripped apart and bent out of shape. Massive holes in the middle indicated that something had definitely broken out of this place, destroying these meticulous defense mechanisms with ease. Between these barriers of metal, were the entrances to small rooms hewn into the bedrock. They were Spartan with nothing but an alcove left and right of the entrance for bodies to be laid out. These entrances were also barred with metal bars the thickness of big trees and these, too, were torn and broken. The insides of these rooms were empty, it was obvious that the former inhabitants had decided to go for a stroll. Each niche had a string of runes carved into the stone. As they got closer, Seth was able to recognize them. Here lies Eric, the Great, last of his name. Hero of the Battle of Persistence, the bard read out loud. You can read this? Ferdinand exclaimed surprised. I learned universal translation. I can read, write, and understand almost any system language, Seth explained and couldn't help that it sounded like a boast. What does this one say? Jess asked, pointing far to the left, the other alcove in the room. Let's see, he said, and they all flew over to the other side. Brandon, the tenacious. Hero of the Battle of Persistence. Another one. Seems like a bunch of people fell in that battle. Do you think the whole crypt is dedicated to them? Lydia asked, thinking that heroes were pretty tough. If the whole floor was full of former heroes, they would have some hard work ahead of them. Probably not. But that doesn't mean the other people down here would be any less than these. Think about, would you bury a nameless nobody in such a place? Mike answered her, understanding what she was thinking. I wouldn't bury anyone in a place infested with miasma and undead. But that's just my personal preference, she joked. You should be more worried that nobody is home. If those guys aren't here, doesn't that mean they are just roaming around, or worse, are crowding at some place? Lixis brought up. Why are you worried? We still have our trump cards and our chaperones. If things go downhill, we have Seth and Ceres, Ray said half serious. So far, Seth had been switching between roles, testing always only a part of his skill set without using his trump cards. If things really went downhill, like the party suddenly facing a serious amount of overpowered undead, Seth and Ceres were ready to go all out. Even though that could mean finishing the dungeon and leveling up quickly, it was not necessarily Seth's wish. He had been temporarily preoccupied with their progress, but the blacksmith actually enjoyed the dungeon experience with the others. Let's stop the idle talk and keep going, after all, we have a couple of people here who are looking forward to their revenge, he said with a teasing glance at Jess and James. Yes. Finally. The two did not interpret it as teasing, they were only looking forward to giving that giant skeleton a beating. They briefly checked all the rooms, to make sure they would be ambushed from behind, but there was really nobody. It couldn't be that the scrubs they had turned to ashes on the stairs were the people from this place. About 12 rooms in, the path branched. It continued straight ahead, left or right, and it seemed like all ways were lined with the same kind of rooms. There was still nobody, however, they found many of these cells still sealed. Should we destroy these corpses now, or should we wait for the moment when they rise as undead? Seth asked the party seriously. The blacksmith was 90% sure they would come after them once they triggered some kind of event. The question was whether they stopped the situation from happening, or deliberately let it happen to gain more experience. We should leave them. It would ruin the experience if we take the gravitas out of the final trap, Finn suddenly asserted, not even talking about gains or losses. She just thought it was more fun to let the dungeon take its course. Nobody really had an opposing opinion. Then let's continue and find those guys already. Jess cheered. They slightly explored the branching paths but kept forging straight ahead as it didn't seem like there was anyone picking a fight with them, for now. Is it just me or does it feel like the pressure is growing stronger? Ferdinand asked carefully. No, he wasn't the only one. The further they went, the denser the miasma in the air became, to the point of exerting physical pressure on them. The encroachment also quickened rapidly. Finn, Bulko, and Ferdinand saw themselves forced to put blessings on everyone, just to slow the miasma's invasion. The only ones less affected by this were those that had been granted blessings or became chosen ones. As they were filled with divine power, the miasma was unable to really affect them. It's a good sign, I would say, the bard answered, looking forward. Why would this be something good? Ferdinand asked, unnerved by Seth's calm tone. Because I guess that the miasma is the thickest and closest to the boss. As long as we follow it, we should finally find some enemies, the blacksmith answered with a shrug. Chapter 845 The Crypts, 2. Colossal Dungeon, The Crypts. It was a fulfilling prophecy, as Seth's prediction came true mere minutes later. The walls on both sides ended and they flew into pure darkness, only the vague silhouettes of the pillars visible when they fly close by it. Ugh, it's like diving in murky inky water. Phaenis complained. Suddenly, light was introduced into the darkness. Rows upon rows of torches lit up in front of them, revealing an expansive vault. Kneeling on the ground were hordes of undead, clad in dark armor. There they are. They even nailed the entrance, Seth commented unimpressed. He kind of expected this scene. Even if it was not exactly this scene, it still counted. In front of them was an aisle free of undead, lined by torches, and it led all the way to a great tomb. A sarcophagus with elaborate carvings that were scratched out. It was propped up on a podium of stairs and illuminated by a torch burning with golden fire in each corner. The thing that ruined this scene was the layer and layer of iron bars that surrounded this tomb. The gates were lined in magic inscriptions that emanated a holy aura. It was clear that they were supposed to get closer. None of the knights moved as they passed them and landed before the barricade of steel. "Can you read that, too?" Lydia asked, pointing at a stele that was placed outside the enchanted bars. "Here lies a traitor to all living, whose name shall be erased from history. All honors of their lives are void and they shall be sealed in this place for eternity," he read out aloud. "That's a really ominous inscription," Bulko commented calmly. It was, especially when taking into account that the whole theme of the catacombs was that corpses, satiated by miasma, rose from the dead and overcame whatever measures were put in place to stop them from coming out. "That aside, should we attack them? They aren't doing anything. Do you think they will jump on us all at once?" Finn wondered, looking at the kneeling horde of undead. They had gotten so far, but none of them had reacted, yet. Suddenly, the whole structure shook. "Finn, you jinxed it," the group exclaimed. Colossal dungeon, the castle. Pillars of white marble. Colorful stained glass windows tell stories of heroes and gods. Golden chandelier and rows of church pews. A throne made of bright gold and tastefully decorated with precious gems. A spear radiating incredible power and elegance. A dust storm that could grind one's bones to dust. "Colossal King, Marcus the Pure Leave boss. What the heck did you do, Link?" she screeched as the party ran from the overwhelming attack, caused by the swing of the spear. "Nothing. I really did nothing," the gourmet hunter pleaded, tears in his eyes, as he tried to keep up with everyone. It had only been an hour since they decided to keep scouting for the boss and take down the guards on their way. It was safe to say, they had found the boss. Wearing a crown of pure crystal and a silvery armor with golden inlays, he exuded a divine grace. Wielding the spear in one hand and a shield in the other, he gave the impression of a holy knight or a paladin. When they first entered the room, the king had not reacted to their presence. They had planned to quietly leave, but Archer saw a door on the walls to the left and right of the throne. After talking about TI for a moment, they decided to send their two scouts, Link and Archer, to find out where they led. Since shortly after the king suddenly started moving, Monique was convinced that it was Link who messed up. With incredible speed, the armored king's hand jumped off his thrones and swung his holy spear at them, creating a dust storm that threatened to scatter the party members across the room. Purge the king pointed his spear and a wave of white light washed over them faster than they could evade or block. Unlike the holy light it looked, this was not the same power as that of a healer that would soothe their wounds and ailments. Passing over them, they could feel the light burn them on a fundamental level. It was like radiation, piercing into their body and causing pain to the very core. "Field of Solace," they heard Linri declare, and the pain abruptly stopped, leaving them hurt and exhausted. Thanks light affection skill, she was able to resist, even with the purging light shining onto her. The priestess had smashed her staff onto the floor and erected a barrier surrounding the party, shielding them from the deadly rays. This was a skill of her unique class, Priestess of the Fount, tremendously strengthened by the necklace Seth had given her. It was the declaration of a field, where her allies be protected and healed for a certain amount of time. It had little power to stop physical attacks but was strong against AoE spells. "Get your act together. We have to fight this thing with all we have," she pressed out, struggling to keep standing. Field of Solace was not without cost, as it took half her mana and stamina to cast. Tekker was already at her side, supporting her and adding his own defenses to her field. "You're right. Even though we didn't plan to, we will have to end the boss here and now." "Thank you, Linri," Monique spoke up and started getting people in position. They had wanted to run away first and think of a strategy, but the boss was too dangerous to let them do that. In that short moment, every one of them had lost almost a third of their health, except for Tekker, who lost about a tenth. If they didn't fight now, they risked trying to run away just to have a better dungeon clear. They couldn't care about the optional boss at this point. The final boss demanded all their attention to survive. "We will do this seriously," she added. "No holding back?" Allison asked, breathing heavily. Bring out your trump cards. She halted when she saw a disconcerting smile creep on Allison's face. The usually so emotionless alchemist was suddenly smiling. Wait, did she also hear a quiet chuckle from the wizard clad in silver armor? She gulped when she remembered the armor. Maybe we should hold back a little. Having been hit by the light, Allison had not just felt pain, but also a surge of power as the armor greedily sucked in the mana of the spell. She didn't know how she still suffered damage, but she didn't care at the moment. The wizard breathed heavily as her mind was itching to act. To use this power overflowing from her armor. To get back for the pain she suffered. To trample. A lot of thoughts were filling her mind, but her objective was clear as day. What are you doing right now, Allison? Monique asked concerned, when she saw the air around Allison distorting from the density of mana collecting around her. Lunacy unleashed. I'm not holding back, that's what I'm doing. You better protect me until I'm done chanting, she said before she fell into a state of quick, incomprehensible mumbling. Damn it! Monique cursed. What's wrong? Jonah asked. We will have to protect Allison. Before they could come up with a good plan to do so, or completely recover, the purging light stopped. The next moment the cleaning tip of the giant spear crashed into Tekker's shield, immediately filling it with cracks. Everyone, we have to buy time until Allison finishes. Vanguard, we will distract the big guy. Tekker, you take care of Allison. Let's go, guys. And don't forget, no holding back. Chapter 846 No Grip. Recovering his spear after stabbing at the vermin's shield, he suddenly felt a danger approaching. Shifting his head to the right, he a piercing pain in his cheek. Only now did he see the puny invader surrounded by the massive image of a silver aura spear. Tisk. He dodged. Do something, Jonah. Instinctively the king made a step back, only to feel something scraping his shin. Grimly, he could feel the hot blood soaking his garments and running down his leg. The pests proved stronger than expected and had scattered to attack him from all sides. They didn't just attack as a group, he could also feel someone cursing him. He only scoffed at their cowardice as he dodged the chop of an axe. Using the turn, he activated shield wall and blew away the pests that were plaguing him, followed by a heal which recovered his cut cheek and shin. The curses were nothing he couldn't resist with his body alone. Invader, you shall die here and become nourishment for the seal, he said with his booming voice and attacked with spear storm. He knew the tiny shield warrior was protecting the rearguard and decided to get rid of them first. However, his attack was met with a mighty torrent of water from the back and completely blocked. Suddenly, with the bellow of a bull, he felt a tremendous pain in his calf, one that almost made his leg give out. He could feel an unholy power and the murky presence of a curse invading his body. Following a sudden impulse he dodged to the side, thinking another silvery spear was aiming for his face, but there was nothing there this time. Shocked, he felt his unharmed leg slipping away. The ground that had been covered in water from the previous attack was completely frozen, denying him any traction. As he was falling, the mighty spear approached him. This time he was unable to dodge. Though was barely able to activate block and raise his shield in the path of the attack. Only for another 2 attacks to aim at his ankle, almost severing his feet. At the same time, he could feel his heart racing, the effects of the poison were spreading. Opposing the pressure of the spear, he swung his shield in a shield strike to get rid of the tiny spear woman. In his fall, he swiped for his own feet to strike at the 2 that attacked his ankles. Keep pressuring him, he heard the voice of the woman growing faint, as he catapulted her against the opposite wall. He stabbed his spear into the ground to regain his footing, blood gushing from his wounded feet. All heal, all cure, your struggles are futile, he spoke using advanced healing magic to cure his wounds, curses and the poison. Only the curse and wound on his calf stubbornly resisted his magic. This was a curse with more behind it than just dark magic. Getting ready to cast another spell and wipe out the annoying rearguard, he felt a cut on the wrist he was holding onto the spear with. Where are you looking? He heard the voice. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the face of cold beauty that had just cut his wrist and spoken to him. Enraptured, he watched as the slender figure danced and twirled along his arm, surrounded by ribbons of his own blood and cutting apart his armor, cloth, and flesh. When his heart beat again he realized in shock, that he had been charmed and just watched on as his arm was mangled. When he finally wanted to angrily wipe off the beautiful warrior and turn him into a bloody smear on the ground, the figure had already escaped. At the same time, he noticed, that his other calf had been cleaved into with the painful curse, making the charm of the swordsman even more terrifying, as he had not even felt the pain while looking at his dance. He wanted to cast a heal, but something hindered him, he was silenced. Enough, he thought, using the spear as a crutch on the ice, he kicked away the little tiger with an axe, who was about to attack his shin again. When he looked back at the rear, he suddenly saw another human right before his eyes. "Hello there. I hope you like carnivorous ooze." The next moment his left eye went blind and he felt an excruciating pain, as if someone shoved a burning stick in his eye to cauterize it. "They sure as hell like eating your eyes," he heard her say cheekily from the left, already a distance away. By the time he turned his head, he only saw the back of a minotaur with a human female under his arm. "All heal," he cast the moment the magic that hindered him from speaking vanished. While the wound healed, the creature eating his eye stayed. Meaning his vision did not return and the pain did not leave. He had enough. This was dragging on for too long and cost too much power. He needed to end this quickly and get back to his throne, or else his people would be in grave danger. The king had held back to conserve energy, but decided ending this in one move was the best way now. Holy DOM! Dimensional rift! He was interrupted by a cackling laughter. Hearing the shout he tried to dodge by stepping aside, but he slipped. What happened next made him wish he had not tried dodging. It could have been a quick death in a clean split, but now he felt his body being ripped apart into two halves, from his left shoulder down to his left ball, leaving him with his right arm desperately holding onto the spear stuck in the ground, while his right leg could not get a grip on the frozen ground, and some beast eating itself through his left eye cavity. "Al! No, you don't!" A middle-aged man suddenly cut his throat. At the same time, he saw a massive arrow, clad in divine light, aiming for his one functioning eye. He had failed. He had disappointed his people. Now their world would be overrun by darkness. His heart was filled with regrets, as he finally faced his death as a dungeon boss. Ding! Your party has killed Colossal King, Marcus the Pure. Leave 165, boss, you have earned experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now Leave 97. The party heard the announcements. Beamont and Archer had delivered the last hits on King Marcus, but everyone stared at Allison, now that everything was over, mostly thanks to her insane attack. Especially the manic cackling had them disturbed. "You can use space magic?" Ray asked, exasperated. "I am a wizard. I have an aptitude for all magic, but I bought the skill scroll in the auction house. I burned through all my savings for it," she answered, still a little out of breath. She had put all her mana, that of the armor and the mana the armor had absorbed, into the spell. The spell was cool, but that laughter, was that the armor? Shay asked hesitatingly. "I guess so, I think I have to raise my willpower a little more," the wizard answered embarrassedly. They talked as everyone was coming back to the rear to get healed by Linry. Some were more and some were less hurt. Monique had some broken ribs, and Doho had a bunch more broken bones. These two had taken the most damage, but in the end, everyone laughed and joked, especially about Allison's final spell. However, their conversation was interrupted as the corpse of the king finally fell to the ground and shook the whole structure. But it was not just the weight of the halved colossus causing it, as it did not stop rumbling for several minutes. Grimly, they realized that there was also no reward chest, dungeon core, or return formation. That meant the rumbling was not the sign that the dungeon was cleared. He was not the final dungeon boss. Chapter 847 News from the Route. Minas Mar. We just received bad news from Karina. Y-City has started impeding on the advance of the route. Mary entered the room and placed a stack of papers in front of Lena and sat down on the chair opposite her. It was the report on what had happened at Tree Station 8. Karina had come by earlier and explained everything to her before returning to TS8. "Is this true? They became resistant to the soul-whisking formations?" Lena asked gravely, after reading through the report Mary had compiled. "Yeah, but Cromwell, that madman, already mentioned that the soul-whisking formation was not the be-all and the end-all of it," Mary said with a big sigh. "No matter the power of the formation, it needed more time the stronger the soul was. The ones they had prepared to set up were able to instantly whisk away the soul of a normal human. They were military-grade technology and technically banned on battlefields. However, since the mad scientist had made the recipients of the serum able to grow stronger, it explained why they were able to survive. If the souls their soul cluster was made of were stronger than a normal person's soul, it could buy enough time for them to pass the formations. Only the parts of their bodies that had their souls whisked away while passing through the formation would be damaged. The problem was that they could also simply heal the damage after passing, shedding their dead tissue like a snake. At least the hanging tree has proven effective against their cannon fodder, even if it is strong enough to pass the formations. Lena tried to find the silver lining. Yet, but that is only because they only have physical power and regeneration going for them. It's not a permanent solution, especially if we have to prepare for troops that can use skills. Karina said she would put in some more effort to strengthen the individual tree, to prepare in case of a bombardment. For now, the Dryad had not asked for reinforcements. Many troops were currently in the Holy Land, while the rest, like the Fae and the Chimeras, were stationed to protect the other tree stations in case of an attack. Right, we can't do anything else, hey? We can only hope Seth comes up with something, or Cromwell manages to make an antidote in time, Lena stated. With a sigh, the princess had to accept that his mad scientist may be his only chance to get some practical solution for their immortal problem. Are you sure you don't have any idea? Mary asked, looking at the princess. After all, Mary was a person of Earth. Although she had learned a lot since Seth put his trust in her, a princess from an interdimensional empire was bound to know more obscure or exclusive stuff than she did. Lena shook her head, depressed. I don't know what you think, but I'm only one of many princesses and princes. I'm a politician who was never that deeply involved with the military, or research sectors of our family. How would I know how to defeat monsters with immortal souls? She exclaimed, stressed. Immortal souls, hey? Mary mumbled. Her fingers started tapping on the tabletop, as her gears started turning. It suddenly hit her like a divine revelation, maybe it was one since she was the chosen of Hestia. Her fingers stopped. What? Did you have an idea? Lena asked, looking up at her, who was staring through her into the void. Mary remembered a short conversation she had with Seth several weeks ago. It was after he had left, mumbling something about looking for a source of souls. When he came back, he had mentioned a source of information among the demons. Chard, a demon and underworld information broker of the demon district. She had only utilized it once or twice to get information. The scale and detail of the reports she had gotten in return had actually served to frighten her. It was like a power that could swallow one if one touched it too often. Back then she decided not to use it, afraid to reveal too much about Minas Mar to a potential source of trouble. But now? Weren't demons experts for her souls? Who else was there to ask anyway? Since the otherworldly princess was as clueless as them, maybe the dimension's traveling scourge of existence had a better idea. Yes, I believe I may have a good idea. Excuse me, I have to send someone to the demon district. Not even an hour later, Mary, Jane, and Lena were facing a demon inside their meeting room. Sitting on one of the sofas, sipping on a cup, was a cheery-looking demon girl. Her skin was a dark orange with wine-red to brown markings and black hair. Her big eyes, which were almost completely black, fixated him as she gave him a warm smile. Contrary to her alien looks, she wore a simply modern blouse and tight jeans. Let's start with an introduction. I'm Mary, in charge of the administrative tasks in Minas Mar, she started, but was interrupted. I know who you are. You are the most powerful woman of Minas Mar, except maybe the cat girl and the fairy, since they are the ones with the power to sway Seth. This is Lena, the princess of Krina, and you are Jane, in charge of the business management, right? One by one, she pointed at them and revealed her knowledge with a big smile. Then she pointed at herself. Nice to finally meet you, I'm Ember, a demon bard and an acquaintance of Seth from college, she finished with her melodious voice. Oh, Seth mentioned you. You are Chard's niece, right? Mary said with a smile, unperturbed by the interruption. You remember me? That's great, then this will be quicker. I'm here since you sent a message to my uncle asking for a meeting. It's about the immortal monsters from Y City, right? How did you know? This time Mary couldn't hide her surprise. Neither could Lena or Jane. Currently, this kind of information was not public knowledge outside of Minas March. Even within, it was mostly the direct members and affiliates of Minas Mar that knew. It's too early to be surprised. We also know about your Guardian program to find strong people to protect the tree stations, she added mischievously. How did you hear about it? Lena asked, upset. Were there any leaks? If there were they on her side, or had the demons managed to infiltrate Minas Mar? It was concerning that the demon knew about it. If they did, maybe Y City also knew. Don't underestimate our means, we are demons after all, she answered mysteriously. But please calm down, we mean no harm. We were about to approach you, too. We want to join, she finally revealed the reason she was here so quickly. The demons want to join Myanmar? Lena asked confused. As far as she knew, the demons had originally wished to settle here because of the volcanic activity close to and below Delta. Not only was this place perfect for many demons with a fiery nature, but it was also great for the forging aspect of demonic bards. This was one of the reasons a bard college was moved here in the first place. Although there were other places with slight volcanic activity in the central mountain range, none of them were comparable to those in Delta. Not all demons. A group of us and part of the bard college wish to migrate to Minas March. An elder of the bard college would like to meet personally with Seth to discuss the matter. You want to leave Delta? Didn't you come here because of the geographic circumstances? Why do you want to leave now? Lena couldn't help but ask confused. Things are changing. It's hard to explain, but recently more and more, unsavory folk have flooded into Delta. They are foreign hardliners that started dividing the people. We do not wish for a confrontation, which leaves only leaving, she said direly. Okay, but what does that have to do with our problem? Jane asked bluntly. Ember smiled mysteriously. That's easy. In exchange for refuge, we offer you a way to put those immortals to rest, once and for all. Chapter 848 Illuminating Colossal Dungeon, the Crypts. As the whole dungeon around them shook, the lights atop the sarcophagus were extinguished. Seth had a sudden premonition. Everyone, get ready. Raise every defensive measure you have, he exclaimed as he did just that. The party was enveloped by Apollo's shield, several elemental shields, a holy barrier, and Jam's new skill Clinker's barricade. It was just in time as the lid of the sarcophagus moved aside by a little and a massive wave of miasma rushed out from inside. The torch lining the aisle were extinguished one by one as the whole space was filled with murky black miasma. The dark power surged up against their defenses, like ocean waves against the coast. For now, it held, but Apollo's shield only had a duration of 30s. It was questionable whether their other measures would hold. Get closer behind me. Finn, keep your skill ready, he instructed as his shield, Antares, grew to the size of a blast door where 3 people could hide behind, standing side by side. With James and Seth huddling together, they would hopefully be able to break the stream of miasma in front of the party. Are you sure? It has a long cool time, if I use it now I won't be able to use it in an emergency, Finn asked worried. The skill Seth was talking about was Protection of Bess, the skill that had saved her party's life during the first explosion of a mushroom fiddler. I didn't mean to use it now. Just be ready in case this does not work, Seth explained, watching the counter for Apollo's shield count down. The shield will fall, now. Scorching light. A bright, scorching light shone from the polished surface of the massive shield, purging the miasma crashing into the shield. Right after the shield skill was deactivated, the blacksmith used another skill of the shield, to buy them more time. Only when the terrifying bright light dimmed, did the miasma finally reach the barriers and shields they had set up. Like a sand blaster, the miasma ground away at their defenses. The outer magic shields quickly broke, one after the other. Seth's and Jess's fire shields hold the longest, even longer than Tatzel's. The light barriers Bulko, Finn, and Ferdinand had set up held even longer, whereas longer in this context meant several tens of seconds. Finn's and Puffles went head to head, almost holding a minute each. Evie's ward mitigated the surge, while her bone barrier managed to withstand almost as if all other barriers broke. When it finally fell, only James Clinker's barricade, a dam of illusory menhirs, was still holding on, keeping the miasma from directly hitting Seth's shield. Suddenly the illusory menhirs started burning in flames. Jess had stepped behind James and covered him in flames. Instead of hurting him, the flames strengthened his defense and that of the skill. Despite the heat, James didn't seem to feel anything but a surge in power. The miasma had been gushing out for 3 minutes when the divine skill finally couldn't keep up anymore and broke. Now it was on Seth, holding up the massive Antares shield. However, the force he expected didn't come. Seth was prepared to use all his strength to hold against the flood of black ink, but he could barely feel the force exerted against the shield. 80% damage reduction from the material, 40% damage reflection from the forging ballad, 25% damage reflection through the synergy of Shield Warrior's constitution which automatically created a barrier around him when carrying a shield, and Tisiphone's mirror reflection 25% of the damage on barriers. Seth had even started using self-immolation burning his mana to raise his defense in anticipation of the impact. With all the reflection and negation that happened through the direct contact, there was almost no sensible pressure against his shield. The blacksmith felt like he could stand there holding up his shield all day, as the miasma raced past them. "Are you okay?" Mina asked him worried. Finn also looked at him concerned. He gave them a cheeky smile. "I could do this all day long. Everything is fine." The miasma had been flowing and breaking against his shield for over 10 minutes when it finally became slower and started to stagnate again. The dark fog was now even thicker, and without the dungeon's torches, it was impossible so past the length of an arm. When the rush of the miasma finally subsided, it was suddenly answered from the darkness. A sound created from the mournful roars of hundreds of dry throats answered the miasma, and the choir of the damned ended with the sound of ripping metal and breaking stone. "What are we going to do now? We can't see anything, we are surrounded, and I'm sure the things from those cells are free now," Phaenis worried. "Let me try something," Seth said and pulled out his bow. Whoever said he had to see something to hit something, right? The Mind Reaper, one of his oldest weapons, but still his favorite. Auto-aim, a slew of debuffs, and a great synergy with his other skills. Life Reaper Seth generated a light arrow and cast the bow's soul skill. Life Reaper would automatically aim for the closest hostile target and deliver a deadly shot. The moment the arrow left the string, it bulged up, as it was hit by the strengthening effects of his equipment. His light attribute was already strengthened by roughly 250% because of the effects of different items. In addition, there was the plus 200% to skill and spells from Sight of Thaya. Meaning just these individual effects already strengthened the arrow by almost 5 times. Other effects like Larrage's archery came on top of that. The arrow of light, looking more like the bolt of a ballista, made a turn and flew straight up. The shining light was barely dampened by the thick miasma as it illuminated the massive rotten face of an undead bending over, ready to attack. Seeing the face only for a moment, they were almost blinded when the arrow penetrated the eye cavity and exploded, ripping apart the head and helmet of the undead. Like the light of a lightning strike in a thunderstorm, the explosion allowed them to get a glimpse of their current situation. The undead soldiers and knights had risen from their knees, standing tall, and all their empty eye sockets were pointed at them, staring at the intruders with their lipless skeletal grins. "Fuck, I could have lived without seeing that," Ferdinand cried out. "I'm glad it's dark again," Azul agreed with him. "Then you better close your eyes, I'm about to bring the Sunday." "PFF, if anyone brings the sun, it would be me," Puffles boasted. "What are you doing?" Lydia asked worried, seeing him pull the string without an arrow and point it at the ceiling. "Make us some room," he said and let go. Apollo's rain of light. The moment he let go of the string, 300 arrows of light the same size American Samoa the previous one, were launched from the bow. Seth had chosen the largest area possible, not that it really mattered. Like a swarm of bees, the arrows started seeking their targets with malicious intent, blowing the colossal undead surrounding them to pieces. "Fine, I will admit that wasn't bad," the Eye-Visor acknowledged begrudgingly. Chapter 849 Den of a Wizard. Colossal Dungeon, the castle. The cathedral floors shook under their feet as they heard what sounded like the roaring of a flood. "Is the dungeon collapsing? Grab what you can and run!" Monique shouted. Link grabbed the spear and the crown of the king before he jumped on the back of the dragonfly golem and joined the others in the air on their escape. They flew into the hallway outside, only to see inky black fog already covering the ground. The black fog from the lower floors rising up. Allison exclaimed surprised. "Doesn't this look a lot darker than the stuff we left behind?" Jonah commented ponderingly, staring at the dark soup rising quickly. "I don't think it's a good idea to enter that." Linri advised against a bath in the murky mist. "That only leaves up then," Tohu implied that they probably had to go further up and face the optional boss to escape the miasma. Monique and Jonah nodded, taking the lead back to the entrance to the tower. At least they had already taken care of most of the guard, was what they thought. Halfway back to the spiral staircase, they faced a terrifying sight. In the place where guards stood and were subsequently defeated by them, undead knights rose from the dark fog that now filled the hallway to colossal hip height. Despite there being no bodies, undead spawned from the fog. Instead of an empty hallway, they now face undead colossi wading through an ocean of darkness. They had been distracted for just a moment when a knight rose from the fog behind them and his massive gauntlet slap came in their direction. Ellen's golem was almost hit out of the air like a real insect, but she managed to recover before she and the golem entered the soupy fog. "Be careful, these guys are faster and stronger than before," she warned them as she rejoined their flight formation without a problem. The golem was a lot tougher than she expected. Looking back at the night that had hit them, she actually found the colossus was now missing 2 fingers. At the moment it was slapped, the aerial striker had counterattacked, leaving the undead with only 2 bony stumps instead of a ring and pinky finger. The gauntlet did little to stop the sharp pair of sickles. Staying closer to the ceiling, the party avoided the fog and attacks of the undead until they reached the entrance to the spiral staircase. They barely squeezed through, as the fog had almost reached the upper edge of the archway. They didn't know whether the whole castle would fill with miasma, they could only hope to escape as long as possible in case it didn't. "We will reach the door soon," Archer shouted. "Look out!" Monique answered from the front as she and Jonah evaded a massive lightning strike, that continued to crash into Tekker's barrier. "What have you done?" a voice thundered. Stranding on the narrow staircase and blocking their path was a colossus wearing precious robes. With his long beard and wand in his hand, he was immediately recognizable as a magician. Even if he had not just thrown a spell at them. "Oh no, the miasma has already risen this high. That means, it's all over." When the optional boss saw the flood of dark fog behind them, he suddenly lost the light and anger in his eyes. "Quick, we have no time to fight him, get past him." Using the chance, Team 1 and 4 passed by him, flying up to the top of the tower. The door to the room stood wide open so they simply flew in. "This is a laboratory," Allison exclaimed surprised. Even when everything was supersized, the alchemist easily recognized the laboratory and den of a wizard like herself. Various glass devices, stacks of books, shelves of powder vials, and drying herbs and ingredients were strewn across the room. There was a massive book propped up on a stand that was obviously the centerpiece of the room. "Everyone, let's try and close the door. It should buy us some time," Ellen suggested. Although the door was massive and heavy, their combined strength was just enough to move the door. Once it got into motion, they managed to swing it shut. With Wolfram's help, they managed to close the latch bolt and lock the door. "What should we do now? Do you think Seth and the others are okay?" Ray asked worried. "If there is something you don't have to worry about, it is the Lord," Wolfram gave a rare comment. Although the golem was with them to protect them, so far he had little reason to intervene. "We should seal the door to stop the fog from entering." "Maybe Shay and Allison could fill the lock and slits with ice or earth magic," Jonah suggested. "Allison, what are you doing?" Monique asked, seeing that the alchemist had left the group, standing on the massive book. What? Oh, yeah, great idea. Shay can definitely seal the wall with ice. Maybe Wolfram could turn it to metal to reinforce the ice and door," she shouted back rather distracted. The others halted for a moment. "You guys do that, I will talk with her," Monique said and came over to Allison, who was standing on the pages of the giant book. "Allison, what is this for you to be so distracted by it? You do get what situation we are in, right? This is the log of the mage we just met on the way up. His research, his day, it seems like he wrote down everything like it was a diary," the alchemist explained to her, not taking her eyes off the page. "I know you are obsessed with reading, but we could really use your help with the door. I'm sure Shay will manage. I just took a glance but it seems like there is more to this dungeon than we thought. This might help us understand this dungeon and what is happening," she explained. "Fine, you see what you can find out. We will take care of the door," Monique gave in. "Oh, and could you send me a Styrian? I can hardly turn these pages myself." The chosen of Athena only grunted as she left. The Minotaur joined Allison a few moments later. The team was not a moment too late. When Shay finished sealing the gap under the door, the black fog was already splashing over the last step of the spiral staircase. Half an hour after they arrived in the room, the gaps were sealed with ice while the ice and wooden door had been transmuted to metal by Wolfram. The last time they looked outside from the keyhole, the soup had already risen to a quarter of the height of the door. "Allison, did you find out anything, yet?" Monique came over after the door was properly sealed and seemed to hold. "Yeah, and we might have fucked up," Allison informed them. "What do you mean?" Monique asked confused. "It's best if you get everyone to listen, so I don't have to explain it several times." Still unsure, Monique gathered everyone. The door was sealed. For now, they could only wait and think about what to do. Allison's information was their best bet to get out of there. "Everyone is here, Allison. Can you tell us what is going on now? This dungeon is a bet with the fate of a world at stake and we might have skewed the scales for the bad guys," she started dryly, before explaining what she gleaned from the book. A force called miasma appeared in their world, which is that black fog out there. It makes all living things sick and turns those dead into undead. Since it was just a natural phenomenon, they were able to contain it at the beginning, but one of their own, in his fear of death, was tempted by the power of the miasma and became a Lich King. What exactly happened isn't described in the book, but it seemed the struggle came to the point that the two sides made a bet with the help of the dungeon god. Since neither side could get the upper hand, they bet on who could hold their own inside a shared dungeon. But Marcus and this wizard, Lamar, had fooled the Lich King. Once inside the dungeon, King Marcus seized the dungeon core and used it together with his power to seal the undead boss below. It seemed like they were ready to spend the rest of their life, holding the evil in this place. However, we killed Marcus. So, the Lich King was probably unsealed and the rising miasma means it has seized control of the dungeon. Thanks for the exposition, but what are we supposed to do now? Jonah asked. Wait for Seth and the others to kill the Lich. Allison asked with a shrug. But what about their world? Linry asked worried. I guess if they both die it's a tie? I don't know everything. This is all I was able to summarize from a geezer's diary, okay? Can't we go down and help Seth and the others? Linry asked, getting weird looks from everyone around. The miasma comes with a status effect that grows stronger the longer one is exposed to it and needs high-level healing magic to cure. If we exhaust all your mana, we might be able to make it to the lower levels. But the most important question is, do you really think Seth needs our help? Allison asked her calmly. The other just nodded. Seeing their reaction, Linry took a moment to think about it. It had been a while so she had forgotten, but now that she concentrated she remembered her travel with the blacksmith. I guess you are right. That's right, so the best option is to stay here and wait until Seth. Crash. Allison was interrupted by a powerful impact on the door. In one crash the transmuted ice was broken apart, only the lock and latch bolt held the door closed. Another impact, miasma came spewing in through the unsealed gaps. Change of plans. On your positions. Monique called out as another impact bent the metal door. It's all your fault, they heard the muffled accusations from outside the door only a moment before it was suddenly ripped apart in an explosion. Ah, shit. Link cursed. We should have done the optional boss first. Shay lamented. Everyone agreed, looking up at the figure that had just charged into the room with a tsunami of black miasma. Colossal Lich, Lamar leave -- Chapter 850 Mr. Sun. Colossal Dungeon, The Crypts. Hey Mr. Sun, do you think you can do something about the miasma? Seth asked Puffles. Once the arrows on light had exploded together with tens of surrounding undead, the crypt had gone dark again. The miasma even obstructed Seth's vision and he was more annoyed by it than he would have expected. Are you sure? Didn't you want to enjoy your little adventure? The unadulterated experience of raiding a dungeon. Yeah, enough with that. I'm not going to hold back if things get this annoying. Please do it, Puff. Since you're pleading, this great me will magnanimously help out, the Ivisor said graciously. The nightmare centipede flew high up and vanished in the miasma. The party looked on questioning until a sun appeared just below the ceiling and illuminated the party's surroundings. Puffles and Tatzel created a miniature sun around himself and his light burned away at the miasma, revealing the situation in the dungeon. They could finally see something, in the twilight of the weakened miasma. In a radius of several hundred meters surrounding the party, the undead had been blasted away by Seth's barrage. The undead past the radius had stopped moving, all of them were looking at the sarcophagus. Following their gaze, Seth and the other saw a black, desiccated hand reaching out from the stone casket. With an effortless shove, the massive stone plate that had sealed it away, flew to the side, crashing into the giant metal bars and bending them out of shape. A second arm appeared and the two grabbed the edges of the sarcophagus, lifting up a black mummy. It looked like a dried-up corpse, but it was dark and lustrous as if it was soaked in tar. On its head, it wore a crown made from a black, crystalline substance. Its eye sockets burning with pale soul fire like that of all undead turned to the sun, shining light on the scene. Slowly it floated above the sarcophagus and revealed that it had no legs. It was a floating torso, ending in a cut-off spine and wearing a long black robe. Eskuk, the lifeless leave 189. What unpleasant light! Begone! A deep voice reverberated through the miasma, and darkness collected around the skeletal hand as the Lich King raised his hand toward the ceiling. A bolt of darkness shot towards the little sun. Eskek grunted when his projectile was intercepted by a strike of lightning. Circling around the sun was a massive black snake that resembled a dragon. Protecting Puffles, who was chilling, playing sun, was Tetzel, playing orbital magic cannon. The seal has been lifted and the first thing I face are snakes and glowing pests, how weird. But I owe you my freedom. As a sign of my gratitude, I will give you immortal life and have you join my army. Domain of Death. Ding. You are under the influence of Domain of Death. Resources regenerate 50% slower. Skills cost 50% more. Skills are 25% less effective. They all felt the tremendous pressure, as the miasma thickened once again. But it didn't just thicken, they could see it flow into the undead, that were approaching the party. Their pale bones and rotten skin, as well as their broken leather and rusted iron armor, were saturated by the darkness, taking on the same black sheen as Eskek. Shit! Evie cursed and hurriedly pulled back her undead army, she had deployed to deal with the encirclement. The reason was, that her minions were undergoing the same change, but apart from gaining power, she had also felt her control over them weakening. Domain of Death did not only put pressure on and weakened them, or strengthened his own undead, but it was also a way to wrestle away control of undead and corpses in the vicinity. What's the plan? Mina looked at Seth, Mike, and Lydia. How about a competition? There is enough to go around for everyone. I will take the undead bloke and you will take the undead horde. Whoever finishes first wins, the Tower Master suggested. That's unfair. There are so many skellies. Finn complained. Okay, I will give you Ceres to help. Deal? Seth asked with a smile. Finn wanted to agree, but Mike covered her mouth. What is in it for us? Lydia asked suspiciously. I'm opening the ballroom for a victory celebration, Seth offered. Deal. They quickly huddled together to come up with a strategy. They are all colossal death knights with a level above 150. They also don't be apt in active magic, Phaenis explained. Of them all, she had the highest appraisal skill. Despite not knowing exactly what level the opponent was, she knew that she could appraise anyone below 150 at this point. Then let's split up. If we want to be quicker than Seth, we have to hurry. Mina glanced at her boyfriend walking toward the boss leisurely. Let's really show him that he can't underestimate us, she said with a combative fire burning in her eyes. Seth leaving the horde strong undead to them, meant he was trusting them, but it also felt like he didn't trust them to be able to take down the boss without problems. So, let's go all out. Looking at Mina's determined gaze, the others agreed. They didn't get the chance to go all out very often. Their biggest trump cards were usually sealed away in case of an emergency. Just firing everything they had sounded fun. All right, we will split up, but the mages should stay with the tanks of their party. Lydia and Mike agreed. Seeing Seth approach the booze, they all nodded and split up this way. However, Mina stayed back with Edward, Evie, and Lixis. I actually have a good idea. Evie, you can use wards to attract enemies, right? Hast thou come to die a valiant death protecting your companions? How vain! You and they shall soon join my ranks, the hollow voice mused calmly. He looked down at the little human, in his dark armor. His presence was a notch above what Eskek expected from dungeon challengers in this world. He had been sealed for who knew how long? On the other hand, someone lesser would have probably been unable to take down that treacherous Marcus and release him. Stop talking so slowly. I have a bet to win. I have to finish you before the others are done with your minions. Any last words? The little man said, stretching his body. Eskek was a little displeased by the words the challenger chose, but it showed how confident he was. Once he had made him part of his entourage, it would be his opponents to be displeased with his minion. He was looking forward to it. Kukiku, I recognize thy confidence. I'm Eskek, the Deathless, last true king of the Colossi. What is thy name, challenger? The Lich King asked imposingly. After he assimilated these challengers, there was nothing in his way to win his own bet and become the dungeon master. Then he would not only conquer his world but also spread to this new world. The more death he brought, the more miasma it would generate and his power would keep growing until he became the god of death. Last true king? Do you call yourself that because you desecrate their graves and make them work even after their death? So you are literally the last king they will ever know, his voice oozing with sarcasm. Eskek had shown him the most respect he could bring up for a vermin, but this was how his sincerity was answered? Maybe he didn't want someone like this under him. It was best if he just purged his personality and had him become a mindless ghoul, like all the others who resisted following him. I'm Seth Smith, blacksmith and bard. The last true king shall find his end at the hands of a craftsman. Eskek snorted when his field of view was suddenly bathed into a realm of flames. So this was where his confidence came from, but the lich could only snort. His body was immortal. He couldn't die as long as his soul was safe, and it couldn't be any safer since it was not even in this dungeon. His phylactery was securely kept in his real castle. He knew this, but then what was with this pain? Normal fire couldn't harm him, but he felt excruciating pain as this dark reddish fire, leaching the miasma out of his bones and burning it up like oil. What did you do to me?